5 ways to scale. Your business in the EU without compliance creep. How one contractor in Italy cost a SaaS company 20,000 euros. They thought they were compliant. They weren't. And the mistake wasn't malicious. It was structural. The real lesson isn't about one contractor. It's about how small compliance gaps multiply as companies expand across Europe. Expanding into the European Union is a logical growth move. Access to world-class talent, large markets, strong economies. But scaling across the EU also means navigating 27 different labor law systems. What's perfectly legal in the Netherlands may be illegal in Spain. What works in the UK may trigger penalties in France. For scaling businesses, especially those with lean people teams or small legal departments, this creates a problem most companies underestimate. Not explosive risk, gradual risk, accumulating risk. We call this compliance creep. It starts small. 1 hire in Italy, 2 hires in Spain, 3 hires in Germany, different contracts, different payroll systems, different employment rules. Before long, your people ops team isn't scaling hiring. They're firefighting compliance. So the real question becomes, how do you scale across Europe without letting compliance creep take over? Here are 5 ways scaling companies stay ahead of EU employment compliance. Run worker classification assessments before hiring. The first risk area is worker classification. One of the most common mistakes companies make is hiring contractors in countries where the working relationship legally qualifies as employment. A US SaaS company learned this the hard way in Italy. They hired a contractor using a standard agreement. On paper, everything looked correct. But in reality, the worker worked exclusively for the company, followed internal schedules, reported to a manager, used company systems. Italian authorities reclassified the contractor as an employee. The result? 20,000 euros in back pay, missed social security contributions, unpaid taxes, penalties. The lesson is simple. In Europe, substance matters more than contracts. Before hiring contractors, companies should run a formal worker classification assessment or structure employment correctly from the start, using local counsel or an employer of record. 2. Map local employment laws before entering a country. The second scaling principle is jurisdiction mapping. Every EU country has its own employment framework. Termination law in Spain looks nothing like termination law in the UK. Take this example. A UK fintech expanded into Spain and later initiated layoffs. They assumed redundancy worked the same way as it does in the UK. But Spanish law requires mandatory consultation periods, specific severance calculations, formal redundancy procedures. These steps were skipped. Former employees filed a legal claim. The exposure? 250,000 euros. The mistake wasn't intentional. It was assuming European labor laws operate similarly. They don't. Before entering any EU market, companies need to map termination requirements, mandatory contract clauses, payroll and social security rules, employee protections. Expansion without jurisdiction mapping is one of the fastest ways compliance creep begins. 3. Centralize workforce visibility. Compliance creep often happens because companies lose visibility across countries. At first, hiring feels manageable, but quickly it becomes fragmented. Contractors in one country, EOR employees in another, direct hires somewhere else, different payroll providers, different contracts, different compliance obligations. Your people ops team spends more time reacting than planning. The solution is centralized workforce visibility. Scaling businesses should maintain one view of global headcount, one system tracking employment status, clear visibility on where compliance risk exists. When your workforce structure is transparent, compliance becomes proactive instead of reactive. 4. Understand high-risk jurisdictions. Not all EU markets carry the same compliance risk. Countries like Germany, Spain, Italy, and France have particularly strict labor protections. Germany is a good example. A U.S. tech company hired directly in Germany with over 500 global employees. They had no local entity, no employee representation review, and no co-determination compliance. Germany requires companies above certain thresholds to follow strict employee representation laws. A termination triggered litigation. The damages reached 46,000 euros. The issue wasn't the termination itself. It was the lack of structural compliance before hiring began. Scaling companies need to identify high-regulation markets early and plan their employment structures accordingly. 5. Treat compliance as infrastructure, not admin. The final principle is strategic. Compliance cannot be treated as an administrative afterthought. It must be treated as operational infrastructure. That means running compliance audits before funding rounds, structuring hiring before entering new markets, reviewing contractor exposure regularly, planning employment models country by country. When compliance scales alongside hiring, expansion remains controlled. When it doesn't, risk compounds quietly. This is the essence of compliance creep. Not a single mistake, but dozens of small structural decisions made without a framework. Scaling into Europe is a powerful growth strategy, but hiring across 27 legal systems requires structure. Companies that ignore compliance eventually face fines, disputes, or regulatory scrutiny. Companies that manage it intentionally gain something far more valuable: predictability, investor confidence, and operational stability. Because in Europe, expansion alone isn't impressive. Compliant expansion is sustainable. If you're scaling across the EU with a lean people or legal team, take the time to review your workforce structure now, before compliance creep decides for you.